Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the Castor Career Enhancement Core webinar, Should ChatGPT Be Your Next Co-Author? I'm Ella August, and for those who I don't know, I am an associate clinical professor in the Department of Epidemiology at the University of Michigan School of Public Health, and I'm also part of the Castor Career Enhancement Core. The CEC thought this would be a timely topic for a webinar this winter because it seems like ChatGPT is everywhere we look in our personal life and also in our professional settings. The chatbot ChatGPT was introduced in November of 2022. And in talking to colleagues and to students, I think there's still a wide range of experience level and knowledge about the technology. Some people are using it extensively, multiple times a day. And I know of many people also who have not interacted with it at all. So we see this webinar as a first step in both getting to know what your experience level is and training needs are with respect to the technology for scientific writing, but also for analysis and other sort of research-related activities. I'm also going to cover some key considerations for using ChatGPT, which is a type of generative AI, in academic authorship. And specifically, I'll touch on how and why researchers have been using ChatGPT in academic writing, considerations related to scientific quality, and ethical and professional standards related to the use of ChatGPT for academic writing. I'm also planning to cover a few ChatGPT basics, including some tips about how to create effective prompts for using ChatGPT and also tips for personalizing ChatGPT so you can get the most out of it as possible. So this particular webinar will not go deep into any one area. We sort of see it as a first step to provide some basics about ChatGPT and importantly to hear from you about your experiences and your needs. And so finally, let me just say that my primary expertise is in scientific writing. I have been working with ChatGPT and providing trainings on the topic, but I am by no means a ChatGPT expert. That said, I welcome all questions, and I'd be happy to follow up with anyone who has a question that I'm unable to answer during the webinar. Okay, so just a few housekeeping items here. We are planning to record the session. I believe the recording may already be in process. If you're not comfortable being recorded, you can sign off and you will be able to access the video afterward. Part of what we're going to do today is to have a small group breakout discussion as well as a big group sort of sharing discussion about your experiences and training needs. These discussions, particularly the breakout discussion, will not be recorded, so you don't need to be self-conscious that Big Brother is sort of documenting everything that you say. And we want to just keep it really relaxed and informal. So if you have questions, please raise your human hand or raise your electronic hand, or you can simply type questions into the chat. Again, I'll do my best to get to all the questions, but I can always follow up afterward if we run out of time or if I don't know the answer. And Molly will be monitoring the chat. And one more slide, I just wanted to make sure that I'm acknowledging, first of all, Molly for organizing and hosting the webinar today. And I also want to acknowledge the Castor Career Enhancement Core for their support, including Dr. David Mendez, Dr. Ritesh Mistry, Dr. Nargis Travis, and Molly Cooling. All right. So I'm going to start with a few very basics about ChatGPT. First of all, ChatGPT stands for Chat Generative Pre-Trained Transformer. And I guess we all like the nickname a lot better because it's much easier to remember. It's known as a large language model, which is a type of generative AI that's trained on these huge amounts of data, these huge data sets. and it uses a predictive model to generate text output. It's also sometimes called a chatbot because you can chat with it in everyday language, asking it to produce text and answers to questions and producing content. ChatGPT can do a lot of different things. It can generate text, translate languages, generate scientific content and creative content, figure out problems, all kinds of things. And just also to mention that the company that created ChatGPT is called OpenAI, and they are based in San Francisco. All right. So, how many academics and researchers are using ChatGPT or other generative AI? These are data from a poll that Nature sent to its readers. It's not a huge sample size, and the data are about almost a year old. So, this estimate is definitely on the low side, but according to these results, about 40% of respondents are using generative AI at least occasionally. And as you can see from this slide, about 70% of those who used ChatGPT said they were using generative AI to help write their research papers. And other research also shows that researchers are using ChatGPT for similar activities, including all kinds of writing activities and research activities. For example, generating titles for papers, rewriting drafts, programming, literature searches, synthesizing data, lots of different activities. In terms of writing quality, how good is ChatGPT? Well, turns out that it's pretty good. This slide shows a result from a study of medical research abstracts where blinded human reviewers correctly identified only 68% of abstracts as being generated by ChatGPT. And they incorrectly labeled 14% of human abstracts as being ChatGPT generated. And so this was in December of 2022. Which would have been ChatGPT 3.5, which is not as good as the version we have available currently, which is 4.0. So it's just going to get better as time, sort of marches on. And this is just really one of several of these types of studies showing that the quality of ChatGPT's writing is at least adequate and often not distinguishable from humans. All right, so I want to move on now and talk about how and why you have been using ChatGPT in academic writing. And actually, I'm going to turn off my screen share now and paste. I have some prompts here, and I will paste those into the chat. And what I'd like to do is, be able to just look at each other. Let's see if I can paste these questions we have for you into the chat. Hopefully you can all see that now. Why don't we first start with how many of you, and maybe just to kind of get warmed up here, how many of you, and if you don't have your monitor, your video on, if you could please turn that on, it will be helpful for this discussion. How many of you have used ChatGPT for anything at all? Finding a recipe, or planning your sister's wedding, or you can raise your human hand or your electronic hand. So it looks like, okay, maybe 3/4. Yeah, something like that. Okay, yeah, maybe a little more than 3/4. Okay, good. And now, how many have used it for preparing an academic article in any capacity? From generating a title to getting feedback, analysis. Have any of you used it? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay. All right, so maybe not quite as many. If maybe 2 or 3 people are willing to just share out, maybe specifically for writing academic papers, what specific activities did you use ChatGPT for? Did you use it to brainstorm, to draft text, revising, etc.?
Um, I've used it for to help me rephrase some things or connect to paragraphs when I couldn't find the words and I didn't like it. And I've tried a couple of times. I just tried, to give me some ideas how to make it to connect them better.
Okay. And did you find it helpful for that purpose?
Yes.
Okay. Others who have used it in any capacity for academic writing,
Yeah,
willing to share?
yeah, I would say what I've done in the past, I use Grammarly. So that is pretty much like a glorified word processing software, but it has some AI capabilities.
Mhm.
Um, and what I've done in the past is usually once I get all my ideas out, I've like basically written the paper. I'll do similarly to what Luce has done is try to improve my work, or if there's something I'm not satisfied with, use that to sort of improve language. Especially because I think sometimes we, as writers, like we're almost trained to be very specific with our words, but sometimes we can get in a rut with how we explain things, and so it's nicer to do things in a more consistent way. I will say that my mileage has varied quite a bit, because especially with academic writing, I feel like I probably will use maybe 20, 30% of like any of its sort of suggestions, just because it really doesn't do a good job. It doesn't place the same value on some words and language as we do. So
Mhm.
one of the funniest examples I think I saw was I was working on a paper on cigar cessation, and it kept wanting to replace the word cessation with death. And it's like, no, that's not the same thing. That's not like I'm not going to rephrase because I use cessation a lot in my paper, you know. Um, but it keeps adding. Grammarly specifically, I think is really useful because it's now been able to identify even just like minor errors that we do. Like I didn't know how many times I use curly versus straight quotation marks, when I'm writing out my paper. So it identifies those little things. Yeah, a proofer would probably identify that. And then the other thing that I've done in the past with I'm working on a couple of grants, and I have very little or no grant experience. And I've written the whole grant, but then there's those sections that you need to fill out, as you're filling out the forms for the NIH, right? Of like, give us an abstract, give us a 3 sentence narrative, or do those types of things. And so I think sometimes it's useful to kind of use that as say like, hey, can you take a look at my 12 pages of science and give me an idea of how I should summarize that, and then use that as an example for starting your example, because sometimes it's hard to like pull out what the key points are. So it's just a nice like I guess that like brainstorming tool. So
Great. Yeah, fantastic. Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. Um, so I guess the next question I have for the group is for those of you who have used it. Um, do you and James shared some concerns or some kind of like maybe pitfalls or some ways in which ChatGPT or I guess it was Grammarly was not helpful. Um, are there any concerns that you have about using the technology for writing or any kind of research purpose? What are some of your concerns about the technology, even if you haven't used it? What concerns do you have?
My concern is somewhere along the way, as I'm trying to learn more about ChatGPT and other AI technologies, is that when you enter stuff into the field to search or whatever, that goes into the larger database, and so I am hesitant to use ChatGPT because I don't want my work to be accessible to, that people can reuse my work without crediting me for that work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a very valid and very common concern. We will address that concern later on. There are some ways around that, and to address those privacy concerns to make your data more private. There's a couple different ways around that, but it definitely is an important concern. Yeah, so thank you for raising that, Stephen.
I have a couple concerns. I haven't used it academically at all. And the thing that stops me, the biggest thing that stops me from even asking the questions is that I've submitted a couple of articles recently to like fairly good journals. And when you submit, they're like, have you had any help from ChatGPT, or has ChatGPT been a co-author? Now I'm concerned about plagiarism, like more generally, but also like the integrity and academic honesty aspect of like, should I be incorporating ideas from, basically a colleague at this stage who's like giving me ideas? So I've stayed away because I'm not sure if it's actually should be encouraged.
Yeah, great, thanks. We will also touch on that later in the. I'm not sure we'll fully satisfy all your concerns, but we will touch on that a bit later in the presentation. Chris?
Yeah, so I've used it in a few different ways, but one of the concerns that I've noticed while using it is hallucinations. So when it's coming up with things that aren't necessarily true, if you ask it for sources on things, it often will give you like made up journal articles. And if you actually follow the link or look for something, the articles won't actually exist. So that kind of stuff, I find it's generally been okay for like pretty big picture things or great for coding questions. But when it comes to details, it's not as detail oriented, I think, as most academic writing and research needs to be.
Yeah, definitely. And part of that is because it's a predictive model. It's not actually thinking about a question, reading the literature, summarizing it, and then presenting a response. It's using prediction to place words next to one another. That is a very common issue. And right on the AI OpenAI website, it says, mistakes will happen. ChatGPT isn't always accurate. So definitely a valid and important concern. Also, with respect to this idea of I think of it as a black box, ChatGPT is not a primary source, right? We're always trained to go back and cite primary sources, and that's just not good practice. You don't know where it came from, so those are definitely valid concerns. Luz, you're next.
Yeah, I think my concern goes in line with what Steve was saying, is how much can you use it until it becomes plagiarism? And if you can, and if you insert, it's like, oh, I wrote this paragraph and they helped me reformat it or something, and I use part either on my paper or my grant or whatever. Can you use this software like Turnitin or these things that detect plagiarism from papers, or how,
Yeah, I can just briefly say something about that now. Plagiarism is in some ways it's a bit I don't know if outdated is the right word. The traditional kind of idea about plagiarism is, in the old days, right, you may have copied something word from word from a source, and then somebody ran it through Turnitin or whatever. Someone discovered oh, look, I found the original source and I'm looking at your paper and they're exactly the same. So that is turned on its head a little bit. Now with ChatGPT, there's a couple different things. First of all, as you probably know, ChatGPT generates a unique output every time you ask it a question. So if I asked it the same exact question 10 times, I would get 10 different outputs. And so there's no original per se to go back to compare. There are plagiarism detectors, I should say ChatGPT detection programs, and none of them are very good right now. If you run a paper through a plagiarism detector, you will probably end up with a result that says something like, and this is more, I was training instructors on using ChatGPT in the classroom, and if instructors are worried about it and they run a paper through ChatGPT detector, and they might get a result that says something like, there's a 62% chance this may have been generated by ChatGPT, and what are you going to do with that? So all that's to say is that we do have tools. They're not that great. They're probably going to get better. But right now, there's no hard and fast, definitive way to identify whether something has been taken directly from ChatGPT output. So, but that's a very, important and timely, concern. I think that we're all wrestling with. Why don't we take one more? Shu?
I like ChatGPT, and I played with ChatGPT several times from time to time. And the recent one was I asked the ChatGPT what are the recent articles on a certain topic, and the version I'm using is like a 3.0 or 3.5, and it refused to give me any answer. I don't know whether this is related to the version I'm using, or I'm curious about that. And meanwhile, it seems like the system is linked to certain database. It's kind of like maybe this is true that it's not updated very coherently with the broader literature. So it's not really updated frequently.
Yes, there's a couple of different things you raise in terms of the access. What data are ChatGPT accessing, I guess, is your main question. And there's a couple of different things. First of all, ChatGPT was the case that it wasn't able to access or know anything that happened before 2021, and that's no longer the case. Since September, everything is completely up to date. No longer has that gap in memory, if you want to call it that. And it's also true that there are biases in the data that ChatGPT accesses, like you mentioned, and you could think of it as a sample bias or a selection bias. It doesn't have access to all data, and it also doesn't distinguish between high quality data and poor quality data. And so, it is not accessing a full range of data and perspectives. And so that's also another really important concern. So thank you so much for sharing those. We are going to move into a breakout room, and then we will circle back, and then I'll present some slides, but then we'll have a chance, once we kind of things percolate, if you're watching the webinar, we'll circle back and have another discussion about training needs and thoughts and comments. So I'm going to share so I remember. Actually, no, I'm not going to share. I'm just going to say we have planned now a breakout room for 5 minutes, and I am going to copy and paste the 2 things we'd like you to discuss in your breakout room. The first question is, what questions do you have about the technology? And I think you kind of got the ball rolling with some of your comments just now. And the second question is, what are your training needs with respect to generative AI, and how do you want to use it? Not just writing, but analysis and things related to the research process. So we're going to give you 5 minutes. Molly's going to break you up into maybe just 2 breakout rooms, Molly. And then we'll ask you if one person could kind of be willing to share out and summarize your discussion after you have a chance to share and compare notes with your colleagues. When we come back, we'll kind of share out a bit. Okay, welcome back, everyone. And now I just realized I don't. Oh yeah, I do have a list right here of people who are in the 2 rooms. Is someone from room 1? That's the room with Chris, Jenny, Louisa, Luz, Nargis, and Ritesh. Is someone willing to kind of share what your discussion was and maybe just summarize some of the major themes?
Yeah. So kind of some of the main things we talked about were, for the questions we had were, what is it doing with our data? And then when should we acknowledge that we're using it? And kind of what's the bar for acknowledging it? So, if a journal says, please tick this box if ChatGPT was involved in writing the paper, do you tick that if ChatGPT wrote the title or the abstract, or maybe like edited something afterwards for clarity? What about if ChatGPT wrote some code for analysis, but wasn't involved in the writing part? So kind of this, when should we acknowledge it?
Great
And
question.
also, how should we be acknowledging it? Should we be writing in our acknowledgments that ChatGPT was used in certain parts of this paper? And then what does this do to the value of our research? And then, to what extent should we kind of be using this, and does it sort of devalue the work that we're doing in the science that we're doing? I don't know if anybody else from Breakout Group 1 wants to add anything to that.
Great summary, Chris.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess a great summary. I just want to add one thing. There was something about, like, I heard that people didn't realize what the ethical concerns are. So just unclarity about what they are. So knowing about what they are may help us use this technology or tool a little better. And there was another comment about if you use it for analysis purposes, like coding or cleaning up your code or revising the way you create variables, does that mean you have to acknowledge or cite it as a co-author in your paper?
Okay.
One more was, are we going to lose our jobs because of ChatGPT or generative AI? Okay, I'll stop there.
Great questions. Thank you so much for those. How about group 2? JJ, Shu, and Stephen? Maybe there's more, but that's all I see in my list.
I mean, we didn't really discuss much because we didn't have much experience with ChatGPT.
Okay.
I was just wondering
Sure.
about what else that this can be useful in addition to writing here. And then we are talking about, the Shu was saying there are some different versions and they may have different actually functions and something. So.
Mm-hmm.
But then we were thinking about now it seems like they can also do some programming and coding help.
Mm-hmm.
And would it be useful for our work? Like for instance, if we want to convert some coding in some one language, if we can ask them to convert it to another language,
Mm-hmm.
and it's certainly probably we can try if it's gonna work.
Mm-hmm.
And also if there is any help to make a better graphics for your presentation and things, if that can be also help for that.
Okay. Great. Anyone else from the second? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
There are a couple of comments coming in. I'm just mentioning.
I don't know if this is parallel, but I watch YouTube videos in coding and don't cite that in my acknowledgments. Okay, yeah. I mean, in some ways, it's kind of analogous. It's but we will definitely. I think that we will touch on most of these questions. But we will definitely circle back as a group, and we're kind of taking note to try to capture all this to make sure that we can address these things maybe in more depth in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again, and
maybe before that, can I ask you, Chris? So you tried to convert RN's data, and how did it work?
Yeah, so I've used it for a lot of different code stuff. I've found, so I've been using the just regular ChatGPT 3.5, not the Michigan 4.0 version, and found that it kind of works, but it's usually not like a copy paste run thing. It's like a copy paste run, something doesn't really work the way I want it to, go back. And it's kind of it's an iterative process of sort of going back and forth, where typically I'll say, well, like, this came out looking weird. Could you try something different? It'll show me something different. And I'll go, no, I think you want it more to be like I'm looking for a command that'll do something more like this. And it'll be like, oh yeah, that is something that would work. Try this. So it works. It usually requires a couple of tries, though. I don't know if others have had experience.
I think that is the hallmark of kind of working with ChatGPT is really you need to keep at it and work that it's very iterative. And I think that's not just with coding. I think that's with writing as well. Luz, were you about to say something?
No, yeah, I've used it for some coding questions, and yeah, at least I see it. It gives me like a good start and like an overview that I can use. But obviously, I have to look more into it for use it for what I wanted. But it has helping me when I don't know. I already watched some things and did a lot of coding, so I just go and it gives me a good overview of where to start or where I might be wrong.
Yeah, great. Okay, I'm
sorry.
Oh yeah.
I just wonder, anyone used version 4.0 and how was the experience?
It's $20 a month, I think. So it's not free. 3.5 is free.
Yeah. But what are the major difference between 4.0 and 3.5?
Well, 4.0 has DALL-E, which can create graphics. And I know that somebody had mentioned wanting to use it to generate visuals. And so that's one huge, it's also it's better in a lot of different ways, more accurate and faster. DALL-E is a huge advantage. I don't know if others want to weigh in on 4. Have you anyone else been using 4? Yeah.
I know there's a 4.0 in the GPT. So I'm not sure.
It's not exactly the same as 4 on the web. It doesn't have some of the capabilities as 4. I think it's kind of a hybrid. But it's called 4. You can choose 4 or 3.5. I'll show that briefly, but there are things I've tried to do in the ChatGPT version that I can do in 4 public version that I can't in the ChatGPT, in the U of M version, I mean. So why don't we go ahead and transition to the slides. I love all of your comments and sharing. We will circle back, I promise. Let's see. Okay. Can you see my slides? Yeah. Okay, good. All right. So we already heard some of the benefits, and I won't spend a lot of time on this, but writers, including students and professionals, have a big benefit that has been reported in the literature, not surprisingly, is that ChatGPT saves people time. It also has been shown empirically to improve the quality of writers' writing, particularly for those who have less developed skills, writing skills to begin with. Students have reported that they're, looking to sharpen their ChatGPT skills with the knowledge that, sort of many of their future workplaces are already using AI and to help them prepare for the future. And then a lot of people have reported that using ChatGPT helps ease the anxiety related to writing and helps them move forward on their writing projects. All right, so I'm going to move to concerns now. A lot of these have already been raised, and maybe say a little more detail about it. Some of the concerns, in addition to some of the issues you mentioned, there are, and I think both of these issues are mentioned. One of them is hallucinations, which was already mentioned. Sorry, I could not resist this graphic. But I asked, so this is, first of all, this is on the black background. ChatGPT can make mistakes, consider checking important information. That's from the ChatGPT main, window, home page, or whatever you want to call it. So they definitely acknowledge, and it's widely known that there are accuracy issues, which are referred to as hallucinations. I asked ChatGPT to provide citations of articles that I co-wrote with a colleague, I entered the colleague's name, and it provided citations that were completely made up and dated before I even met this person. So it's definitely, a major concern to be aware of, and that ChatGPT just has accuracy issues and often makes mistakes. And we also, discussed that using information from ChatGPT to write a paper is problematic because it's not a primary source, of course, and you'll not be able to cite and should not cite ChatGPT as a reference. ChatGPT is trained on data created by humans, and therefore it is not bias-free. It carries some of the same biases that its creators and its training data have. For example, it carries biases to what, this was raised earlier, what information it has access to is already sort of a selection bias. Another example is that has been shown to that it is programmed to provide opinions that lean toward being socially correct. A team of researchers, I think it was at Yale or Stanford, have done some research and concluded that ChatGPT has a pro-environmental left libertarian orientation. And it has been shown to have many other biases as well. So those are two of the major, and I'm putting those in the bucket of scientific quality concerns, because those will impact, of course, if you're using it for writing or any part of the research process, those will impact the quality. So there are two items I have listed here under ethical concerns. Someone had expressed that maybe they weren't quite sure what was being referred to with respect to ethical concerns. A major ethical concern is data privacy. Participant data, or even a draft of your unpublished manuscript that you enter into ChatGPT is not kept private. ChatGPT uses data for training purposes. So what you enter into ChatGPT out in the, in the wild, in the public 3.5 version is not confidential, and this is stated on the OpenAI website. And there are some exceptions to this, and I'm going to briefly touch on these in a moment. The other major concern, and again, this was raised earlier, is the issue of transparency. For example, making it clear to a journal's reviewers and to your paper's readers that how you may have used ChatGPT for the development of your paper, and exactly how you used or may have used ChatGPT. And so we will also circle back to this issue in a moment. I guess another thing that falls into this bucket is this idea of plagiarism or using verbatim text from ChatGPT. All right, so some related to data privacy and a variety of other issues, some institutions have their own versions of ChatGPT. Sometimes these can offer more data privacy compared to the public version. So this is a screenshot of our internal ChatGPT platform at U of M. I'm not going to spend time on details of this platform because not everyone has access who is not at U of M. But I want to note that if your institution does have a dedicated platform, I guess the first thing is to find out if your institution does have a dedicated platform. And then ask yourself a few questions about data privacy before you use it. You should find out, who the data are shared with, and what the protections and guidelines are for entering sensitive data or private information. I mean, this is true with the regular ChatGPT as well. So data entered into the U of M ChatGPT are not shared with OpenAI. So the data are not used for training purposes. So therefore, for example, and I just double checked just to be 100% sure I'm giving you correct information. I double checked with the people who created the U of M ChatGPT, but it's completely fine to enter your manuscript data into this U of M dedicated version and to ask, for example, for ChatGPT's feedback without worrying that's going to get leaked and you're somehow going to get scooped, or it will be out in the cybersphere. There are specific, they're working on getting a higher clearance. Let me just say briefly, they don't recommend you, or they prohibit entering data, sensitive, identifiable data right now into the U of M ChatGPT. They're working on getting a higher level of security right now. I put the link on the bottom for those of you who are at U of M. And that is a data guide that gives a little more information about what you can and cannot or should not put into the U of M version of ChatGPT. There is another way you can make your data more private when you're using the public version of 3.5, for example, on the web-based version. You can prevent OpenAI from using the information you enter for training purposes, which was going to enhance your privacy. So, I'm not going to really go into details about this, but you just have to type something into the prompt. And I included a link at the bottom of the screen with information about how to do this. In this mode, I'll just say quickly, data are retained for 30 days just to monitor for abuse and inappropriate content, but it's not given to anyone for training purposes. So it is kept secure. All right, so now I want to share some professional standards with respect to using ChatGPT. I think some of the information here may address some of the concerns raised earlier. And so these are professional standards for using ChatGPT for academic publishing. And I'm going to share a sample of some author guidelines that are relevant to this group related to using ChatGPT for this purpose. So, okay, first I'm going to start with this slide. I'm sure everyone is familiar with this information. This is the ICMJE standard criteria for authorship. This is the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, and this is kind of the standard authorship criteria that most journals use. And so let me just say that most of the author guidelines I'm going to show little excerpts from different author guidelines in the upcoming slides. Most of these prohibit the use of ChatGPT based largely on this fourth criteria here in red that requires authors to be accountable for all aspects of the work, including the accuracy and the integrity of the work. And a computer really can't do that. And so most of the sort of the guidelines around ChatGPT hinge on this fourth authorship criteria. All right, so this first excerpt is from Nature, the journal Nature, the author guidelines. And you can see they prohibit including ChatGPT as an author because it does not meet authorship criteria, particularly the one we just looked at in the previous slide related to accountability. They also say that if ChatGPT or another large language model is used, it should be properly documented in the methods section. And this goes back to this issue of transparency. So they're asking authors to be very transparent in reporting all of the activities that they use ChatGPT for, to report that in the methods section of the paper. And if the methods section is not available, maybe in an appendix or something. So, and just to say, I will be showing slides like this. They have too much text for us to read all together. I will be circulating the slides. You can take a closer look after if you'd like, and you'll have access to these slides. So the journal, I include Science and Nature because they're top tier journals, and I think they set the the tone for a lot of other journals. So I just wanted to include science. It's basically saying the same thing here. ChatGPT can't be considered an author. And I included 2 tobacco-specific journals just because they relate to you. It's basically the same thing here for tobacco control. They say that only humans can be authors. And the same type of thing, again, for nicotine and tobacco research. ChatGPT shouldn't be an author, and if it was used in any capacity, it should be documented in the methods. In other words, each activity ChatGPT used for should be listed out in the methods section, or they're saying here in the acknowledgement section. So again, addressing the transparency concern, and of course, with anything, and when we're writing a paper, to be completely transparent about how we did our study and how we generated the paper. And just for the sake of completeness, I refer to COPE a lot in my work with scientific writing, the Committee on Publication Ethics, and they're a strong voice for ethical issues relating to publication, scientific papers. And again, just basically mirroring what we saw in the previous author guidelines. So really, we're seeing a lot of consistency here in terms of ChatGPT should not be listed as an author. It should not be considered a co-author. And also, if it is used in the paper or in the research, it should be documented in the methods. Okay. So now I want to transition. I want to share some practical tips for using ChatGPT to help you get more out of your interactions with ChatGPT. I'm hoping this webinar is kind of a combination of a discussion, but also I really want you to walk away with some practical information and tips. So I'm just going to cover. I'm going to cover 2 things right now: how to customize ChatGPT, and then how to get the most out of, as Chris mentioned, this iterative back and forth, working with ChatGPT iteratively with prompts. So the first tip is to customize your ChatGPT account so it can provide the kind of output that's going to be most helpful to you. So setting up custom instructions helps ChatGPT sort of understand how to respond to you in a way that's more closely aligned with your expectations and the type of work you do, and to make the output just generally more relevant to you. And it can also help you save time and sort of get what you're looking for in fewer steps, and to reduce the time you have to spend clarifying or correcting responses. So I'm just going to show a super quick example. And actually, I think I put the version here of ChatGPT that I used. I'm going to show a series of examples just in the bottom right, so you can see. I think it's 3.5 for almost all of them. So that's the free public version. All right, so to customize your ChatGPT, first, click on your name. You can see Ella August here, this little green button. And when you click on it, you'll get this little menu here above it. I guess, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not. Then you choose custom instructions. And then you're going to get a double paned window. And this is the top part of the window. And it's going to ask you to share information about yourself to help it tailor its responses. And you can see I told it I'm an academic professor who's interested in scientific writing, and just to give it some sense of the type of, who I am. And then the next pane asks, how do you want ChatGPT to respond? And here I told it to provide evidence-based responses, to be formal in its language, and to provide detail, and to remain neutral. And I also told it, being the taskmaster that I am, I told it to call me Dr. August. Okay, so I want to show an example of the difference between pre-tailored and tailored. So here, this is an example of an interaction with ChatGPT before I customized it. I asked ChatGPT, write an article about tobacco use during pregnancy. And we're not going to read every word of this output. We're not going to even read any of it right now. But to summarize, basically, it produced more of a fact sheet than an article. It's very broad to the point of just being generic. And so it really wasn't even in the ballpark of what I wanted. So the only thing that's different in this slide is this is after I customized it. I asked it the exact same prompt, write an article about tobacco use during pregnancy. It's still not exactly giving me the type of document I was really wanted, but it's much closer. It's more detailed. It reads more like a scientific article than the previous output. So just that change alone is going to help it understand who you are and what you want. Okay, and now I have some. So for the next several slides, I have some tips to help you write effective ChatGPT prompts. And as I mentioned previously, you should not, of course, include ChatGPT as your co-author for a publication, but there are a variety of ways to effectively leverage it to help you, when you're developing your paper, from brainstorming to summarizing a particular reading, grammar, and English usage, which were mentioned earlier. So I'm going to give an example in the next few slides. And the example is asking ChatGPT to provide feedback on a draft manuscript. So in this example, we're going to just pretend that I wrote a draft and I'm asking ChatGPT for feedback that I might incorporate into my draft to improve it. And so for this presentation, I'm just going to focus on the abstract, just a sliver of the paper to keep the example manageable, because some of the ChatGPT output is very long. All right, so the example objective I wrote for this made up, example is, what is the perceived risk of e-cigarettes secondhand smoke compared to combustible cigarettes among a sample of UK adults? Might not be the most sophisticated or correct type of objective for tobacco. I'm not a tobacco researcher, but and then I've decided that the target journal is tobacco control. So the first suggestion I have for prompting ChatGPT is to tell it what role you want it to play. So here I'm telling it I want it to take the role of an academic tobacco researcher who's providing a peer review for my abstract. So that's basically what I said in the little green blurb at the top. And then ChatGPT says, certainly, Dr. August, I'd be happy to provide a peer review. Please go ahead and share your abstract and I'll give you a detailed review. Okay, perfect. All right, so the next tip I have before I give it my abstract, I suggest that you provide examples of the type of writing or other example of the type of product that you're looking for. So in the case of a scientific paper, this is going to give ChatGPT cues about the style of writing, the intended audience, et cetera. So what the next thing I did in this example is I told it what I was going to do. I was going to give it an example. I said, before you provide feedback to me, I'm going to show you the type of writing I'm trying to achieve with my draft. Help me make my writing like the example. So, again, you can see for those of you who haven't used ChatGPT, you can just use everyday language. It's very, it really is remarkable, just how the naturalness of the language that you can provide to it, that it will provide to you. So then it's saying, of course, Dr. August, please provide the example that you're aiming for, and I'll do my best to help you achieve that in your abstract. And then it provided a bunch of advice about how to write an abstract, which was not what I was looking for. Okay. So then I went ahead and I pasted an example of this paper's abstract into ChatGPT. So this is the paper I chose here. A published paper. I just pasted the abstract in just so it could have that as an example. And then I give it the background section of my abstract. But first I'm reminding ChatGPT I don't want it to rewrite the abstract for me. I want feedback. So I tell it that, and then you can see starting here. Can you see my cursor when I do this? Yeah, okay. So starting here, I give it the background section of the abstract. It's just one sentence long, and it falls very short of what should be included in a background section. It says Public Health England, that's their kind of public health government agency, has concluded that e-cigarettes are much safer than cigarettes for the user and for secondhand exposures. Okay, so clearly this falls way short. And yet, the feedback it gave me did not really pick up on this, all that was missing from this background section. I'm not going to go review this output in detail, but just to summarize, the feedback it gave me was not that helpful. At one point, it suggested that I add a citation, which doesn't really make sense for an abstract. It's also asking for a transition sentence to help lead into the study objectives, but there were no study objectives in the draft I gave it. So I guess at this point, it's important to realize, when you see this kind of output and it's not helpful at all, it's important to realize that this kind of output does not mean that it will never be helpful. It means that you have to keep working with ChatGPT until you get helpful output. So this is really part of the back and forth process that Chris had mentioned and that many of us probably have experienced. So the next thing I did was I copied and pasted some advice that somebody else, it was actually me, had written for something else. And I pasted it into to give it some advice, like here's how an abstract should be written. Here's some bullets. So I'm training ChatGPT on how to write a good abstract. So I paste that in. I didn't spend time writing this all out, just for this. And voila, ChatGPT came back and provided some really helpful advice on how to revise the background section of the abstract. It just needed more information about how an abstract should be written. The more guidance you can provide, the better. So here I added guidelines from the target journal to help further tailor its feedback. I mean, really, there's a lot of information you can really help it to understand. So I'm giving it tobacco control author guidelines, I guess all of this wouldn't be totally necessary just for the abstract, but, maybe the abstract length, some information about the journal, et cetera. So the more guidance, the better. You can even tell it things like avoid abbreviations and avoid causal language. I was curious about this causal language thing because it's something I feel like I'm constantly noticing when I read papers. And even though ChatGPT does get confused sometimes, at the same time, it is really surprising sometimes how much it does know. I asked it if it knew what causal language was, and it gave me this surprisingly sophisticated answer. And might it stumble when it was actually trying to identify causal language in practice? Maybe, but it's worth the effort, to give it a shot if that's important to you, when it's reviewing, your writing and giving you feedback, et cetera. So these are just examples. And the point really is to show that you need to sort of keep at it with ChatGPT and provide it a lot of guidance. Be sure you're asking it for clear, specific tasks. And sometimes it will misunderstand and you need to kind of reframe or rephrase. I would say it's also really best to work in stages. You shouldn't really put everything in one prompt. It's better to break bigger tasks up into larger, into smaller tasks. Okay, so here is a summary. ChatGPT should not be your next co-author, to answer the question we asked in the title of this presentation. You can incorporate ChatGPT into your paper development, spend time creating specific prompts, and personalize the technology. Be prepared to iteratively work with ChatGPT to arrive at the output you want. After each set of results, evaluate, make changes to your prompt, and see if you can get better results. I would say manage your expectations about the amount of time you'll need to work with ChatGPT to get what you want. I guess in looking at this summary, I think I also should have added to be sure that you're transparent in reporting how you used ChatGPT in the methods section or another relevant section in your manuscripts. And looks like we have 20 more minutes. And so, I'd like to, sort of circle back and maybe go back to some of this great discussion that we were having. Maybe some additional ideas or thoughts surfaced during, about your training needs or anything else during this latter part of the presentation. So, yeah, Luz.
And just a quick question. So when you were looking at when you were describing the first, before just take it out of my mind, this sounds amazing. I didn't know I can do so many things, which is kind of dangerous because it makes me want to use it for more things that I'm using now. So thanks for that. And the other one is, so you have your account and everything, and then you put, in terms of the abstract, you give ChatGPT a little bit more information on how to evaluate, right, your abstract, or how to write your abstract. Are those instructions saved for later? Like if I come back, in 1 week time, and I ask him, does it keeps that, or I have to do it like every time? Every time that I want to do that?
That's a great question, and I am not totally sure. I don't think it learns in a long-term way. I think for each session, you need to re-educate it, but to be perfectly honest, I'm not totally sure. So that is something I'm going to really just make sure I have the exact right answer, and I will circle back for you. That is a great question. Yeah, so your question is, does it learn kind of permanently? Or, when you say like, here's how to write an abstract, and then like 4 months later, you go to, you want feedback. Does it remember? Is that your question? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. That's a great question. Other comments or questions?
Just on Luz's point, I wonder if that might vary if it's in like a new ChatGPT window, or if you're using the same ChatGPT window where you educated it about how to write an abstract. Because I kind of go back and forth myself when I'm using it between, okay, is this like something that I think is kind of similar to something I was already talking to it about? And then in that case, I don't know if it's remembering.
Yeah, like you can see your history there, but
yeah.
is it drawing on it?
Exactly. I mean, from interactions, it seems like it is drawing on it, because I can say, I can refer to things that it's previously said.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know. I guess I'm curious about how much it's kind of learning and building off of what you're saying, both in the specific conversation you're having with it, and then once you open a new window, does it forget all of that?
Great question. I'm gonna see if I can find out. Other comments or questions? I have another example I can show if people are still kind of thinking about things.
I guess I just wanted to say that the reason we're having this workshop is to learn about what the training needs are amongst our group members around ChatGPT and generative AI. So if you have any suggestions of things you would like to see more often, I've heard things about data visualization, coding, which is maybe something we can partner with the DAM group to try to do. If there is more interest in, writing related training, or hands-on workshops where you may bring in a writing product and try to use it with ChatGPT in a group setting. Whatever it is, it would be helpful to us to see if we should kind of continue along this line of training for our group. So just think about that as we wrap up the session, and hopefully by the end of it, you have a few ideas to share with us.
Yeah, Lisa.
I like the idea about the data visualization piece because I'm a very visual person, and I do try to put a lot of thought in how to visually represent the data, especially in a way that can communicate to even the lay audience, right? Not just fellow academics. The one thing, as I'm trying to learn more about AI, and this is not necessarily a question of my learning needs, but just an overall comment of like, I'm so scared that by relying on these tools, that we become so dependent on it that we lose the ability to think critically ourselves and how to do certain things. Like even just data representation. I attended Dr. August's presentation, I think like a year and a half ago, and I found that so invaluable. But if I now turn to AI to help me generate those visuals, am I going to lose the ability to think critically, to know how to do it? Kind of like kids today don't know how to read the hands of a clock because they're so used to reading time on a digital monitor, right? With like numbers already spelled out for them as opposed to the hands of a clock. It's kind of like that for me. So I'm struggling internally with that.
Yeah, I think it's a huge, important concern. And, I'm not sure we know really, it's kind of looking for like, I don't know how you would measure it. It would be, it's such a short time, but is there anything on critical thinking and use of ChatGPT, and what do we know? And, it's a big question. And I think it's going to take a long time to find out. But, kind of in a related point, I do think there's going to be an impact on science. People are using it a lot. And one of the things I know people have been using it for is to generate ideas for grant proposals, which is kind of, if you think about it, it's really just drawing on, it's sort of derivative. It's just drawing on existing data. So we're not really able to, it can't really think of new innovative ideas, at least at this point. Yeah, I think it's a major concern, and it'll be interesting to see how it will shake out, and maybe it will have a different impact on some of the newer scholars and newer researchers. I guess another thought that's coming into my mind right now as well is that AI is going to be integrated. It's already integrated into a lot of different software. And I think that's how we're going to encounter it. Probably most people will encounter it that way in the future, rather than being in this, this sort of frame of, back and forth with the prompts. It's going to be integrated into Word, into, at a certain point, a certain extent it already is, Excel. It's already embedded into design programs. So that will really, I guess, force our hand. We'll all be using it sort of whether we want to. It's not so much of like making the decision to go to OpenAI's website and to use ChatGPT. It's going to be built in to a lot of our everyday activities, which is also kind of, it's a big change. So, Jihoon, did you have something?
I have a feeling that it's kind of inevitable at the moment. It's like trend, and we have to adjust ourselves to in this new environment. And just, I also attended one ChatGPT session, like workshop. It was provided by Michigan University sometime like last month or 2 months ago.
Mhm.
And then one concern actually was about the grant writing. Like some people may want to put some their writing on the ChatGPT and then get some feedback, but they said never do that because it's all creative, your originality, your idea. It's going to be shared by people, so you just have to be careful not to do that.
Yeah, and I know that the NIH was one of the first organizations to come out with a rule about ChatGPT before even the journals did. And that was their primary concern, is they realized early on that peer reviewers who were reviewing grant applications for the NIH may be tempted to paste in the grant applications to ChatGPT and then ask it for feedback. And so they made a rule very early on that prohibited any use of ChatGPT for the grant review process. And yeah, that's definitely a concern. And yeah, and so I don't know if anyone else at another institution besides U of M knows of a dedicated platform, but that can ease some of the concerns about data privacy, at least. And then you can also, put a command into your prompt asking it to not share your data for training purposes as well. So.
I had a thought about Louisa's comment on, are we going to kind of lose our critical thinking skills? I almost think that maybe it's going to be the opposite, where there's going to be so much more content now that we have to sift through that's being generated that maybe it's going to require us to be more critical with the information that we're seeing and more discerning. I mean, certainly when I'm working with ChatGPT, I find I have to be read through things with a pretty fine-tooth comb sometimes to sort of spot places that it's making mistakes, or even, I was asking it earlier today about some methods questions and was asking it about a specific thing, and it would say the method is one thing in the first paragraph, and then 2 paragraphs later say something completely different. And so, it's easy to kind of definitely put in a prompt, get a response, and be like, okay, that's great, I've got an answer. But I think it does require a lot of, well, is this prompt actually giving me what I want?
So in your mind, it's all about how you engage with the technology. It's how vigilant you are in reviewing the output, and how critical you are of really making sure that it's giving you accurate responses and giving you what so you're really paying attention.
Trying to, yeah.
Yeah. I have a little funny story. I was when I was working on that example, and the first output, the feedback output ChatGPT gave me was so bad, with that abstract example. And I was like, oh man, this is terrible. And so then I had just worked on this document where I was writing up all the elements that should go in an abstract. So I'm like, oh, I'm just going to paste this in here. And so I went ahead and I pasted it in there. And then as I was pasting it in there, I was like, let me just make sure I'm giving it the correct advice. And I found an omission that I really should have included in this other document that I had written. But I wanted to make sure I was giving ChatGPT good advice. And so it helped me to identify an error that I had actually made. And so it sounds like a similar experience to what you just described. I don't really trust it. So I just wanted to really double check very carefully. And so I think if you're in that mindset, you can really, your critical thinking skills are not going to suffer, and you may even catch, catch some things that you wouldn't normally be so vigilant about.
I agree with what Chris said. I just when it reflect on me, it's like the world become faster and faster. We are everything become more accessible to us. It's like when we think about maybe 50, 60 years ago, people learn from their books. It takes time to go to school, to go to library, to learn something. And then when we come to the internet era, it's like we just click the keyboard, but still we need to search for the information piece by piece, and we need to put pieces together to make a story. And nowadays, it's like ChatGPT just give us a story, regardless it's a good story or a bad story, it's a story. So
Yeah.
we need to be very careful to identify whether this is our good story, whether this is the story we need. So I think this should be a part of the education. It's like seminars, workshop, or events like this really help us to be aware of those tips and also tricks. And then we learn from it, and then we remind ourselves we need to be very mindful. We need to implement critical thinking all the time. So yeah, I feel it's very, very helpful to have today's session. It reminded me again that when I read anything from ChatGPT, I need to think it through, put critical thinking all the time.
So I feel like actually that it's going to be like vice versa. I mean, it's like both directions. So I mean, ChatGPT, I'm sure it's going to improve, like it's going to evolve, like advanced in the next generation. But human also can improve. We can improve in parallel.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like one of my greatest barriers with using it is that it's a new way of working. To ask it something and get something and ask it something to make it better. And I find that's very hard for me to do. And for us to be prepared for this new tool in the next 10 to 20 years, we need to learn how to do this way of working. Because at some point we're going to be able to say, hey, run a regression on these data sets, or these data, etc. And you don't really need to know the code or point and click or anything. These technologies will produce the results for you. So just to be able to work like that is, I think, a new way of doing things that I think we'll all have to get used to. And this is one of my big barriers, and just try to work with it. I get annoyed actually so much with what it gives me that I'll forget it. I'm just going to do it on my own. Anyways.
Yeah, it's definitely like, I think if my first time using ChatGPT for something like that, for some kind of academic, writing activity, you kind of expect it's just going to magically create something amazing because it's a super powerful computer. And then you kind of get down to the trenches and realize like, oh, this is a lot of work. And it's really, and it will improve so much, I'm sure. Like Jihoon said, like it's going to improve so much. But I think managing your expectations for this, at this moment for using ChatGPT is really key, and really understanding what it's going to take to get what you need from it. Well, I see that we're just about at time. So thank you very much.